So today I chose a slightly different background. People told me that the background previously of the white wall was really seriously boring. So today I'm sitting on the porch on the veranda of my house. The virtual journey you're going to watch after this is a little different from the others. It's longer than the others, and it was actually originally a talk I gave just a week ago to a group of people that shared part of my background. Therefore, every now and then in it, there'll be one or two inside comments. Don't be put off by the inside comments. Wait until you get to the description of the two or three events that I describe on journeys, which I think you will find very, very meaningful. Wishing you all, those of you anyway who celebrate Pesach, I'm wishing you a happy Pesach. Those of you who have Easter coming up, I hope you have a meaningful Easter. And for all of us, I hope we get out of the other side of Corona as fast as we can. Chag Sameach, happy, meaningful Easter to you all. Bye.
Hi, everyone. So I suppose the question I'm asking myself is whether I should cry now or sometime later on during my presentation. It was quite amazing seeing the names in the chat. Took me back to some powerful, powerful moments a long, long time ago. So when I guide groups, I often have to start off with explaining to them that I don't have an accent. I work with North Americans. I have to explain to them on the first day, look, I don't have an accent, you do. They then guess. Some of them guess New Zealand, some guess Australia, and eventually they get South Africa. I don't have to do that with you. Now, these are very unusual times for all of us. I'm used to being in a bus full of people or at a site with people, in a room full of people. In many ways, for me, this is the ultimate bizarre situation, because my work over all the years, in spite of my father's dreams that I should be a doctor, ended up being a madrich, I suppose, for all of my adult life. And this evening I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do and why I do it. But I do want to just for a moment reflect back on days long gone past. So my journey, as some of you know, I think that Ian Epstein knows, I think that Myrna knows, the people from my Shichva know. I grew up in Somerset West. Somerset West, by the way, used to be about an hour and a half from Cape Town. Today, since the building of what we proudly called a number of years ago the National Road, Somerset West is now about 35 minutes from Cape Town. When I grew up in Somerset West, there were very few Jewish kids my age. Besides Richard Kaplan and Herzl Brodowski, none of whom, by the way, went very far in Habonim, there were not many kids my age to be friends with. So my friends were actually, not yet, Howie, you're a little bit fast, take it down. So my friends were Carl van der Molen, Elby Fora, Hannes Hofmeyer, Martin van Schoor, Peter Pringle. Later, of course, were added at an appropriate moment Magda Lombard, Nicolette Miller, Sandra Lawrence, who I have to admit I lusted after, Lorette van der Merwe. You get the drift. Some of you too, I know, are Bura Yoda, come from small Jewish communities. Many of you were pupils at King David, Herzliya, Carmel College, Theodor Herzl. I went to Somerset West Primary School, Hottentots Holland Hoërskool, and Paul Roos Gymnasium Stellenbosch. In many ways, two parts of my life, two very different parts of my life. The journey which took me to where I am today, a member of Kibbutz Tzorah, via the Machon LeMadrichim, Kibbutz Yisrael as a volunteer during the Yom Kippur War, Aliyah with Garin Yehuda to Nir Eliyahu, actually began with the decision of the Cape Town Habonim to send an amazing madrich to Somerset West to work with us. Some of you will remember. Jeffrey Paris. I can still see him with his eyes tightly closed. A habit he had when sharing something important with us. He would close his eyes very tightly and talk to us and introduce us really to a world that I had never ever had any idea existed out there beyond the edges of Somerset West. What I learned from him has been the basis of my professional life ever since. He introduced me to a world in which the search for meaning was at the center of all that we did. I was taught to look for the important questions as much as to find the answers. And most importantly, for my pedagogic approach today, I was introduced to a form of education in which the entire group has responsibility for the educational process, not only the designated teacher guide. Each and every participant plays a role in the educational journey. So thank you, Jeffrey. I'm not sure I ever told you what you did for me and how much I owe you. This is you now, Howie. Just before we move on to the topic of today's first head talk, in case you did not recognize me from the photo accompanying the announcement of this talk, I've asked Howie to put up a few older photos of me from over 40 years ago. Howie, just show people what I used to look like. And I think there should be another one. Okay, some of you might recognize that more than you recognize today. And of course, there's a third one just to indicate the types of ideas that we embraced when we were in Habonim. No, you missed it. Doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter how we'll leave it out. So our headmaster, Stephen Pincus, asked me to pepper my presentation with occasional jokes to keep you awake. Especially the large number of you have joined us this morning at 5 a.m. from Sydney and Melbourne, which is probably none of you at the moment, unless Lynruch actually did wake up. So the bad news is, as hard as I try, I just cannot get into the joking frame at all. I just cannot do these. I have to admit that the impact of Corona on me is, I do laugh as you do at the incredible jokes that are put on at the moment about living with Corona. But the only thing that came into my mind when Stephen, when you asked me to tell jokes from the old days, the only thing that came into my mind was a picture of Alan Brody, Darryl Isaacs, and Binger Graham dancing Swan Lake. And then what do I remember? They dancing the dying swan. Not exactly what one wants to hear right now. So what I'm going to talk about is the work that I do. My feet are not in Berlin, but occasionally on the journeys I lead, my feet are in Berlin, in Krakow and Warsaw, in Cordoba and Toledo, in Budapest, in Vienna, in Fez, in Marrakesh, in Amman, on Mount Nebo, in Prague, in Normandy and Paris, in Rome and Pitiliano, in Yanina and Saloniki, and of course, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and around the rest of Israel. When you travel as much as I do, or to be honest, did right now, and probably did for a long time, you have to hold on to the core of the work you are doing and be clear what your intentions are, what your messages are, what your purpose is. Not only for those who are traveling with you, but equally for yourself. If you do not, you end up with, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium, racing around from place to satisfy bucket list needs of the people you travel with. With these thoughts in mind, I want to share a poem with you sent to me a few days ago by Steve Hellman of Johannesburg, Habonim, now of Kibbutz Tzorah, and most importantly, my kibbutz father from 1972 when I was on the Machon. Steve is a wonderful, wonderful teacher of poetry. He teaches it on the kibbutz. And here is what he sent me when he received the word of today's topic. For the traveler. Every time you leave home, another road takes you into a world you were never in. New strangers and other paths await. New places that have never seen you will startle a little at your entry. Old places that you know well will pretend nothing changed since your last visit. When you travel, you find yourself alone in a different way, more attentive now to the self you bring along. Your more subtle eye watching you abroad and how what meets you touches that part of the heart that lies low at home. How you unexpectedly attune to the timbre in some voice, opening in conversation you want to take in to where you're longing, hard-pressed enough inward on some unsaid dark to create a crystal of insight you could not have known you needed to illuminate your way. When you travel, a new silence goes with you, and if you listen, you will hear what your heart would love to say. A journey can become a sacred thing. Make sure before you go to take the time to bless your going forth, to free your heart of ballast so that the compass of your soul might direct you toward the territories of spirit, where you will discover more of your hidden life and the urgencies that deserve to claim you. May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely into your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you. May you travel safely, arrive refreshed, and live your time away to its fullest. Return home more enriched and free to balance the gift of days which will call you. John O'Donoghue. I continually face the issue of making my journeys meaningful. For those of you who don't know, I should explain that what I do with my life for the last couple of years is that I take people away on journeys. I take people away on journeys to the places I mentioned earlier on, and of course, many, many journeys in Israel. This concern, making my journeys meaningful, has become a central concern of mine in what I do. So much so that I call my travel initiative Journeys Making Meaning. I'm not sure if that was advertising or not, but if it was, I apologize. It's all very well being concerned with meaning making, but the real question is, how do you do it? In a world of travel in which the clients have a list of must-sees and must-dos based on the very real fact that it is a costly affair and they are not going to travel to Berlin or Florence or Krakow twice. So I give them the must-sees in Florence the Uffizi, in Granada the Alhambra, but at the same time I give them something more. What is this more, you ask? Let me use two examples to explain what I do. It's January the 27th, 2015, and I'm with a group at the Jewish Museum on the Judenplatz in Vienna. We started off outside by visiting the extraordinary memorial sculpture by the British artist Rachel Whitehead. A sculpture I will not describe to you, as if you have not seen it, I want you to see it when you visit it without my description. But you're going to have to take my word for it. It is a powerful and appropriate work of art, especially when you are aware that it comes about because of the Jewish community's anger at another memorial in a different part of town. But that too is for when we visit Vienna together. Inside the museum, we are standing at the archaeological remains of the Or Zarua synagogue. At the height of the anti-Jewish pogroms of Easter 1421, in the so-called Vienna Gzera decree, hundreds of Jews were burned to death in this place, a sobering thought. Increased, by the way, by the fact that the remains were discovered while digging the foundations for the new Holocaust memorial. One of the members of the group, who has traveled with me before on a number of occasions, asks to speak and then makes an unforgettable contribution to our visit to Vienna. Remember the pedagogic notion of all of us in a grouping responsible for learning that happens, the Habonim Engaging methodology? He reminds us that it is January 27th, the date of the liberation of Auschwitz in 1945. Yes, we are standing at the ruins of the Or Zarua synagogue, destroyed by the mobs in 1421, on the very date that Auschwitz was liberated in 1945. So what does one do with a fact like that being injected into the situation? I didn't even need to think about how to respond. He carried on. His uncle, from Hungary, told him the story of what had happened in his barracks in Auschwitz on that day. Early morning, they filed out of their barracks expecting another day, another appel. They soon realized that the Germans had fled, and they asked each other, what should they do? One of them suggested that they sing a song. But what song? My storyteller turned to the group, his voice choking with emotion, and he shared the song they chose. Hatikva. What did my group do then? Of course, they sang Hatikva. A second example. It is May 10, 2016. It is quite late at night and I'm lying in my hotel bed in Berlin, thinking as I always do the night before I guide any site, even a site I've guided dozens of times before. How am I going to guide the sites tomorrow? What are going to be my entry points? What is going on in the world around us today? What happened last week in Israel, in the United States, in Germany? Who are these people I'm guiding? What questions have they been asking? What concerns them? What is happening in my life? What new insights have I had since last visiting these sites? I realized something which then becomes the focus of how I guide the group the next day. May 11th, the next day. At 10 minutes to 10 a.m., we are in Sanssouci, the magnificent pleasure gardens completed by Frederick the Great of Prussia. I gather my group into a circle and ask them a question. Could someone please tell me what time it is and why this is significant? They look at their watches and shrug their shoulders, obviously a little worried about what might have gone wrong with me during the previous evening. It's 9:50, but so what? I respond with another question. Yes, but what time is it in Israel? Someone realizes where this is heading. It is May 11th, 2016, which in that year was Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day for the soldiers who have fallen in defense of the State of Israel. At 10 a.m. exactly, 11 a.m. Israel time, we all fall silent as if we can hear the 2-minute siren far away in Israel. After 2 minutes have passed, I read the following to them. The poems I always read to groups who are with me on Yom HaZikaron after the siren ends. Yehuda Amichai. And how does one stand in a memorial ceremony? Erect or bent? Rigid like a tent or limp as in mourning? Head humbled like the guilty? Or raised in defiance against death? Eyes wild or frozen like the eyes of the dead, or shut to view the stars within? And what is the best time to remember? Noon, when the shadows are hidden beneath our feet, or dusk, when the shadows grow, long like longings, with no beginning and no end, like God. Then I read to them the second poem by Natan Yonatan. My beautiful boy, I fall in love with you again each and every day. The tape reel of your laughter, the light clear pool of your tears, the rustling happiness of your soul. Even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, nothing bad will happen. I will only feel longing as you are with me day and night. The poem takes on an added layer of meaning and penetrates even deeper into the visit when I remind them that Natan Yonatan wrote this poem after his son Lior fell in the Yom Kippur War. What has happened in both of these examples I have given, and which I believe are examples of what I try very hard to do on my journeys? There are 3 elements which I can work with, which I do work with, which are in these stories. 1, how do I find connection points? Those points of connection which add power to the narrative as they enable us to connect via a piece of ourselves. When personal narrative and the overarching narratives meet, meaning happens. Time. Where not only the present is involved, but also the past and possibly the future are invoked, included, something powerful happens. It is not only us standing here, but also those who we are connected to via our history, and those who we are connected to via our destiny, perhaps. Space. Where not only the space where we find ourselves physically in is part of the site, but other spaces are brought into the site, become part of the site, then the context grows. Just consider the 2 examples. In Vienna, in time, we had 2015, 1421, and 1945. In space, we had both the Judenplatz of Vienna and Auschwitz. In terms of connections, there was the Uncle, and there was Atikva, a song which for almost all of us has connections to special moments in our lives. In Berlin, in time, we had Central European time, and we had Israel Standard Time. In space, we had Potsdam and Israel. In terms of connection, many of us had soldiers we could recall who had lost their lives fighting for Israel. And then there was Lior Yonatan, who remained with us that entire day in Potsdam and Berlin. One additional thought connected to the ideas above. The statement that each time I visit a site, I see it as if for the first time. Some of you will recognize that phrase as being used originally by T.S. Eliot, not only by me. is not just a throwaway line. Consider visits to Yad Vashem. I must have taken 500 groups there over the years. It is the same museum, the same avenue of the righteous among the nations, the same children's memorial. And yet, when I guide African Americans in the museum, possibly because of the guilt of my South African past, it is always very different for me. I find it so emotional guiding people of color through Yad Vashem. Think of the following. I discover that there is a person in my group, a Gentile member of the group, whose uncle had recently passed away at a very advanced age. He was a single man, and she, as the closest living relative, had to unpack the letters in his home. She searches through a box in the attic of his house and discovers thank you letters from the Jews of Luxembourg, whom he saved as an American diplomat serving in Luxembourg during the Second World War. Walking down the Avenue of the Righteous among the nations felt very different that day. Once, just before entering the Children's Memorial, the memorial to 1.5 million Jewish children murdered in the war, I find out that there is a woman in our group who recently lost a child to Tay-Sachs. Became a totally different visit, with a different emotional tone to any other visit of mine to the Children's Memorial. The narratives of each and every member of my groups has a place in the guiding as it unfolds. There is no separation between subject and object. For me, travel becomes journeys when these elements are happening. Of course, we have fun, eat good food, and visit beautiful sites, which stand alone without being part of overarching narratives or helping to create context. But this is not enough for me. I want to leave plenty time for questions and discussion. I hope there will be. But I want to end with 4 thoughts from people whose thinking has influenced the way I guide, and ask you to consider each of their thoughts for a moment. I also want to thank somebody that most of you do not know, who has also had a huge impact on my guiding. My partner in many of the journeys in Europe, Jeremy Lee, an extraordinary academic historian and wonderful, wonderful human being, who unfortunately is battling with a physical condition which makes guiding more and more difficult for him, but continues to be a wonderful, wonderful example of how even with serious medical issues, one can continue to make a difference. 4 people whose thinking has impacted on my guiding. First, Alain de Botton, the popular philosopher, writes in The Art of Travel, existential travel, the pleasure we derive from journeys, is perhaps dependent more on the mindset with which we travel than on the destination we travel to. Amos Oz, in his autobiography, A Tale of Love and Darkness, quotes his aunt saying, "The only journey worth making is the journey into oneself." Now, I know I put this up at my peril, because if you listen to Amos Oz, at least to his aunt, and decide that the only time you're ever going to journey will be the journey you make into yourself and never travel with me, then in addition to Corona, I will probably never guide again. From my favorite anti-Semite, I too have a favorite anti-Semite, T.S. Eliot, a few lines from The Wasteland. We shall not cease from our exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And finally, from Yehuda Amichai on Jewish travel. Jewish travel, as it is written, I will lift up my eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. Not to hike to see a tall mountain in all its glory, nor a climb to rejoice in the vistas of nature, but a hike with a purpose, to seek help from the high heavens. With these in mind, travel with the right mindset, focusing both outwards and crucially inwards, being aware of not only where you are, but also where you return to, and to always lift up your eyes to search for the purpose, the meaning of what we are involved in. With these in mind, you and I can journey together. I really, really look forward very, very much to seeing you all in Israel in October. More so now, I have to say, since these strange days have come upon us. It really has hit home just how important it is to be in touch again with the people, the so many people that I've lost touch with over the years. Thank you very much for allowing me to do the first of these head talks. Thank you to Mark, to Stephen, to Dave, to Howie. Keep well, folks, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julian. Everybody's giving a virtual applause. You'll see a button that you can press to put up your hand. You need to do. You can try it on the screen, but best to do it by pressing the button. And we'll open. What we'll do is we'll let you unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
Is everybody still awake, Stephen?
I think everybody's very awake, but I don't see any hands go up yet.
I see somebody's asking where is the hand button.
Aha.
Underneath the participant links. The participant names. Maybe we can sing and then go back to Julian.
Good idea. Why don't you give us a song, Howie?
But Tim Spiegel wants to speak. Tim Spiegel, your microphone's open. Maybe Tim doesn't want to speak after all. Okay, so let's sing a bit.
Ilana.
Sorry?
Ilana Hurwitz, I see, wants to speak. You've got to unmute your line, Ilana. No, we're not hearing you.
Oh.
There you go.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right. Thank you, Julian. That was really just very beautiful, moving, thoughtful, thought-provoking. Thank you for opening it up.
Thank you.
You're obviously steeped in history, in art, in culture, in poetry, and in your guiding, you've had to encounter tragedies on both the micro and the macro level. And I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but we're dealing with an unimaginable, unprecedented event that is affecting us, throughout the globe. And you spoke about connection points, and you spoke about finding meaning, and Hatikva giving us hope. And I'm wondering if you can connect those three things, the connection points for us, giving us meaning in what we're going through now, and hope for the future.
So, I'm just responding with the following. So I've been thinking, what is it going to be like the first day I go back to guiding, which I think unfortunately is going to be a long, long time, because I'm guessing that one of the things that will take the longest to recover after we hopefully get through Corona will be people getting the emotional courage together again to be able to become tourists. I'm guessing it'll take a long, long time before people venture out, even though I can tell you, at least theoretically, my 2021 is packed full of synagogues and JCC groups and all types of other groups that canceled this year and are talking about coming next year. But those are institutions. I'm not sure about the individuals themselves. And I've been sitting in the last few days and imagining, what is that first day going to feel like? And I'm going to get very emotional. And I imagine standing up in front of the group, and I'm trying to think now what site I'll choose. I'm a great believer in thinking very, very carefully about what the opening site is. And I often use the opening scene from Great Expectations. Some of you will remember Pip in the cemetery, that amazing opening scene which has never left my mind, even though I read Great Expectations, I think when I studied English at UCT in the 1970s. And I think a lot about where do I begin to tell the story, because where you begin to tell the story makes a huge difference in terms of how the story actually develops. And I think of myself standing up in front of a group in some place that I've chosen, being ready with the words and then not being able to say a thing. Just having, just the tears flowing. Now, it's interesting, both Amichai and Natan Yonatan, who are not Orthodox Jews in their practice, both use traditional Jewish liturgy as part of their poetry. And I have to say, as somebody who, I don't define myself in any traditional sense as a religious Jew, not at all. However, we seem to have within our tradition the texts and the language which work in times like this. And I imagine myself standing up in front of the group and going to something which belongs to us. Because my connection to Jewish texts is that it belongs to us. I feel strongly about it, not because of a divine connection to our text, but because I really feel it's mine. It belongs to me. It belongs to you, Ilana. It belongs to all of us. So, I don't get much solace at the moment, I have to admit, because for me, and I don't know your situation, when I only see my grandchildren via WhatsApp, how do you get beyond that? So, I can only say that I'm hopeful that we are all learning very powerful lessons at this moment, which will lead us to think more carefully, which will make us understand that we are all connected. Ori and myself, Ori's my wife, and we came back from India recently. And there was this wonderful text we read in India from some wonderful Indian author, and maybe somebody like Jackie Pillam or Steve Hellman will know who the author is, who said he was asked about how he treats the other. And his answer was, there is no other. And I think in some way, my great hope for what comes out of this is that while we are in this strange situation so far from each other, we learn that there is no other. I have to say that I'm not sure if I answered your question in any other way. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be emotional in this, what feels like a very safe space, but that's what I have to say.